been an amazing, thanks Del, wherever you went, that was amazing. The Lord never says that the state is responsible for education, but that parents and elders are, that we are. And I often ponder what inspires the habits of learning, what sort of ignites a fire in a person's soul. And I think it's living, I mean, it'd be a fascinating conversation for all of us to have, and we can, the panel too. But I think it has to do with living in the truest story, the right story, not a flat, gray, meaningless world, but one of advancing a kingdom of light and love, which is never dull and always exciting. I spent the 1990s at Harvard and often spent time in the archives, and Del shared a bit of the bylaws and that the school existed, of course, that students would come to know Jesus Christ. And in 1636, the motto was first in Christi Gloriam, for Christ's glory, and then Veritas, Christo et Ecclesiae, truth in Christ and the church, and now just usually Veritas is what you would hear. What regress this new dark age has become, this long march through the institutions of cultural Marxism. In public schools, we see social engineering to dumb down the next generation, poor educational content, sexual experimentation in suburban and inner city schools, inner city high school students, in high schools in which half of the students graduate without the ability to read in some cities. This isn't love. This isn't progress. It's the culture of death. It's funded by forces who want to weaken sovereign nations and diminish human populations, literally. Let's take personal responsibility for a lot of things. For example, let's expose the money behind the culture of death that often, so often leads to really bad people like George Soros and his Open Society Foundation and comrades. We studied this massive flow of money and what it's doing. You could look at AmericanEvangelicals.com, the new American Association of Evangelicals that we're building now, for short videos on this. Our weakness as nations is their greater power of the Open Society, so-called. Let's expose bad teachers and just be honest about it. In Columbus, Ohio, there was a teacher named Mr. Schwartz. And at the time, I didn't have the courage to make it public, I guess, or I thought I was being nice. Mr. Schwartz regularly ridiculed Christian students, and at one point, he threw a Bible on the floor. So together, my husband and I went to the principal and Mr. Schwartz and asked a lot of questions. Did you really do this? Yes. And so forth. And the teacher said, the principal said, well, they could have gone to Fox News. And now I think, 10 years later, I'm sorry I didn't. On the other hand, let's also encourage good teachers. There are so many who mean well and want the best. They feel overwhelmed as well. Let's get on school boards. Let's advance educational policy for school choice and vouchers and great books. Let's campaign for pro-life and school choice candidates. Let's vote. Let's do homeschooling. Let's help classical schools. Let's help Chuck Stetson's Bible Literacy Project and learn from Canadian friends, Judy Vankovich. Raise your hand. Judy, are you here? Stand up, maybe tall. Find her. She's fighting the Soji battle in Canada, in Vancouver, and it's been an incredible fight, and she's very heroic. Let's learn about the Forge Leadership Network that's here. Jeremiah, are you here? Way in the back. Okay, everyone try to find Jeremiah. He's got the Forge booth right out the door. Fantastic Midwestern Ohio network of young rising leaders. Let's do digital networks and digital reach. I spent 20 years creating a sort of new wineskins, or trying to, something, or sort of building in the ruins, if you will, at Harvard in the 1990s. We created something called the Veritas Forum. And I thought it was one weekend, but it's turned now into 25 years in 200 universities. And I invited an unknown person at the time named Ravi Zacharias to come and speak at Harvard. I invited John Stott and Dallas Willard and a whole bunch of other people wanting to raise the hardest questions of the university about anything, and then to hear from folks who know the Lord and who have a biblical worldview. And I remember saying to Ravi in 1992, I really hope 100 people come. And lo and behold, we walked into the law school and there were 700 students at the first night of a 3-day conference. And part of that was just getting the Christian groups to function as what we'd say a symphonic witness, collaboratively. And that took a while, but once it happened, there was critical mass. And it was very exciting. The questions arose about truth, what truth? God, what God? Questions about science, questions about suffering and evil, questions about the body, and so forth. It became this very rich experience, and I think that students who felt like you couldn't even ask their hardest questions in their classroom in a school dedicated to truth. So we created the experience of an actual conversation in which they could come to the very one for whom the school, Harvard, was founded. Our own children were in public school, in high school at one point, and we created an alternative for English and history where they could read the great books. They learned Latin and Greek roots. I was the teacher, so they didn't have a choice. They learned to write. And many of our friends' children joined as well. There's so many opportunities. Let's lead, and let's do so in a way that we become a witness to a very hurting world. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.